The migration to Europe is not predominantly a Southern Africa issue. If anything at all, I would say there are more migration from Western Africa to Europe than in the Southern Africa. Because as you may note, the Southern African region hosts a number of middle income and upper middle income countries. So the migration within the Southern African region is more intra-regional, mostly from the other SADC member states. About 68% of the intra-regional mobility within the Southern Africa region are from the SADC member states. And what we as IOM are doing, and as I mentioned in the morning, you cannot stop migration. So what we are doing is to work with the government in the SADC, of the SADC member states in development policies and embarking on operational activities to manage migration. Because you cannot stop it, but we can manage it in such a way that it becomes beneficial to the countries of origin, transit, and destination. So we're helping them now. We have the regional migration policy framework, which we are developing for SADC. We are also in the process of developing or finalizing the national migration policy for Namibia, which is currently before the Parliament. We are doing the same for Zimbabwe, for Zambia, for Malawi, and for Angola. So we do both policies and also undertaking operational activities in managing migration, but we cannot stop it. Well, it's important to really, most governments, I believe, are aware of the fundamental causes or drivers of migration. As you mentioned, economic factors, political factors, bad governance, insecurity, civil strife. In all this, it takes our government to improve on, the political governance, to improve on the economic management in the country, and to provide opportunities, especially for the youth. Because the youth are living not because they don't like their countries, but it's because of lack of opportunities. So our government have to create jobs. That is the first and most important one. Without jobs, the youth will live in search of jobs. So it's important that we are able to create a conducive macroeconomic environment where we are able to create jobs, create opportunities. As the youth graduate from the universities, from the tertiary institutions, that is what we need to do. We also have to be able to address this, the conflicts and wars, which is also driving people through forced migration. We have to be able to do, as the AU put it, to silence the guns. And once there is political stability, it's likely to address some of the drivers of migration. It will not address it completely, but it will help mitigate those driving factors. It's very difficult to have specific figures, reliable figures on the diaspora. But in terms of impact, indeed, yes. When people leave their countries of origin, they are not just moving as human beings, they are carrying with them skills, a lot of innovation, a lot of intellectual capacity. So it's a big loss to our government, especially when they use the mega resources to train them, to educate them. So when they leave, that means our governments do not get the benefit of deriving any kind of benefits from the people that they've trained. And that is why it's good to put in place retention policies. But the best form of retention would be to provide those opportunities, to provide employment, to provide hope, so that it enables them to stay. And also, if they will have to leave, we have to create other legal pathways. Otherwise, they will use irregular or illegal pathways to migrate. And this takes international cooperation amongst member states. And that is one of the reasons why we are here today with MIDSA, which brings together all the SADC member states to have a common understanding and policy coherence, sharing experiences, good practices, information on how do we work together to manage migration. In the same way, that is the fundamental guiding principle of the Global Compact on Migration, which the whole global community have agreed on how do we work together, mindful that one country cannot manage migration. So how do we work together as international community to agree on a set of principles, a set of understandings and commitment on how we manage migration to maximize the benefits of migration, whilst at the same time working together to reduce the negative side of migration. For climate change and migration has been there for a very long time, except that it's now that is becoming more apparent, or we're beginning to recognize it as a two-way factor, because environment and climate change induces migration. And at the same time, migration could also impact on the environment, because when people are moving, take for instance nomadic or pastoralism, you have people who are moving with their cattle, looking for grassland, looking for pasture, looking for water. It impacts on migration. At the same time, when there is no water or grassland, people will move. So in the region, we're working with governments to reduce what we call the disaster risk reduction. How do we reduce the risk of climate change and the environment? We just had this workshop with the Indian Ocean countries, where we are looking at migration, environment, and climate change. How do we mitigate that? Again, we're looking at building capacities for response, that is emergency response and preparedness. How do we prepare? Because for natural disasters, we cannot stop it. It will come. But when it comes, to what extent are we prepared to respond in a timely fashion to save lives, to preserve property? So now governments are becoming more and more aware that the impact of migration, the nexus between migration, climate change, and environment is very direct. And for that matter, we have to prepare ourselves through awareness and an adaptation. Adaptation, that is embarking on practices and policies that helps us to mitigate the impact of climate change and the environment. The governments are doing their best. They have their own domestic budget. But within the multilateral community, we also have agreements and partnership with the European Union, with the US, with many of the Western donor countries. For instance, within the European Union, they have the 11th EDF, that is European Development Fund, that they use to support the national government through the National Indicative Program. At the same time, they also have funds that they use to support the regional program, that is going through the Regional Indicative Program. But it's not that the governments are not doing nothing. They are doing something, but of course, they also have to step up, because you cannot always rely on donors. And I believe they're doing that, except that the needs and the demands, more often than not, are more than the resources available to address them. But to a large extent, it also takes maximizing the resources at our disposal, and also allocation, depend on the resource allocation. What are the priorities? For instance, is health, education are priorities, so that should also determine where you allocate your resources. And then at least it makes sense when donors also chip in to support our efforts. But our government are indeed doing what they can. They are doing a lot. We have to recognize that, we have to appreciate that, and we have to commend them for the efforts.